Part 2 of parents trying to take my house from my brother. They broke my locks to move in while I wasn't home. After I kicked my parents, brother, and sister-in-law out for trying to force me to hand over my new house to my brother, I immediately went to my social media and told the story to the whole family. It spread pretty fast, but you won't find it now because it all got deleted some time ago and I put my own profile on private. I posted about it because I knew that the first thing my family would do when they got home is to try to twist the event to make me the villain. And I was exactly right. But I had about an hour to get started before them, and I had video evidence to back up my story about what they've done. No, I don't plan on showing the video here, so don't ask. Being preemptive worked, because I got a fair number of family members on my side right away. My parents, brother, and sister-in-law must have been all set to write their own post, but it was too late, so they didn't even bother trying to lie much. My parents, Dan, and sister-in-law had a few flying monkeys supporting them, but not much else. Plenty of others knew how entitled they already were, so what happened was something they all quickly understood and accepted. There was one person in particular that called me. I don't know who they were, but they ranted at me that I was a horrible brother, that I needed to make way for a real family man. I just ended the call and blocked the number. This didn't repeat. The week went by and my parents showed up with Dan at my front porch, just like they said they would in their prior ultimatum. They rang the doorbell like crazy and also pounded on the door until I finally answered. I opened it just a crack and they tried to shove their way in again. But I'd installed a couple of latch chains that prevented it and even braced my body against the door for good measure. My father and brother demanded I let them in, but I said I was recording everything on camera and would call the police if they tried to force their way in again. My mother calmed them down and then in her most sickly sweet tone asked me if I was ready to let my brother move in. I just told her and the rest of them to get lost and never come back. My mother put on the crocodile tears and asked me why I can't just do this for Dan, because he's my beloved brother. I laughed and then bluntly said I do not love him as a brother because he treated me like trash for years and they only encouraged him to do so. They are terrible parents and he's a terrible brother. Then told them to leave or I'd call the police ASAP. They all left surprisingly easily, apart from my mother's loud crying and the others giving me dirty looks. One could even say making them leave was suspiciously easy. I thought the whole mess was over, but I guess I should have taken them more seriously because they had other stupid plans. I came home that week on Friday evening to find a moving truck at my brother's minivan parked in my driveway. It was Dan and his family there moving stuff in. He just waved to me with a turd-eating grin when I saw him. I was furious and told him and the rest of his family to stop. But sister-in-law smugly said to me that, like it or not, they were moving in. And then, in the most fake way while tilting her head and puckering her lips, she said that it was okay because my mommy allowed it, and I should always listen to what my mommy tells me. I seethed with rage just hearing those words and looking at her smug, witchy face. So, I locked myself in my truck to call the cops right away. When they realized what I was doing, sister-in-law started pounding on my window and yelling at me to stop, and that I can't do this to her because she and Dan need a house. And she cried, "Why can't you just do this for Dan?" I responded with, "F Dan, it's my damn house, not his." Then she threatened to key the side of my truck unless I stopped calling the police, all of which the 911 operator heard, thanks to the window being slightly open. I told sister-in-law if she damaged my truck, I'd sue her. And she was smart enough to retreat. When the police arrived, Dan and sister-in-law, along with their kids, had locked themselves in my house. I told cops what had happened as well as showing them my new driver's license that had my current address on it. Then when we went to my front door, I saw that they'd changed the lock. And the old lock was laying on the porch with the center of it drilled out. And the drill they used was laying right next to it, with a complete Harbor Freight drill bit set. Could they have been any more stupid leaving evidence out like that? I pointed out the broken lock and drill, then gave the police a rundown on all the events that happened prior. Well, I guess Dan called our parents over at some point after I arrived home, because they showed up while I was talking to the cops. My parents immediately lied and started saying that I'd agreed to rent my house to my brother and his family. I said that was an easily provable lie one way or another. So, Dan and sister-in-law finally came out of my house with some papers in hand. They both looked super smug, like they'd somehow outsmarted me. They'd actually drawn up and printed out a fake rental agreement, but my signature was not on it. There was one, but it looked nothing like my handwriting. I don't think any of them have ever actually seen my signature, so that was incredibly stupid on their part. I told my parents and Dan that was stupidly blatant fraud. And if the cops investigated, they'd easily figure that out. And I don't think going to jail and courts would do them any good. It could even make Dan lose his job, which is his only means of providing for his family. I also said I would get a lawyer and sue for damages if anything of mine was lost, stolen, or broken. And I'd call CPS too for good measure. Dan went white and looked really scared when I said all that. But my mother got between us and doubled down about how I should just do this for Dan and live in a damn camper so they can finally have a family home to themselves. I yelled at her that if she thought it was such a good idea, she could do it for Dan herself and let Dan have her house to himself instead. The cops separated my mother from me, and I said I wanted them all out right now, or I'll press charges. I stated in a shout about how they drilled out of my front door lock to break in. The lease papers were obvious fakes, they badly forged my signature, and I have recorded video of sister-in-law attacking me. Those are felonies I could ruin their lives with if I wanted. And if they didn't leave, that's exactly what I would do. The only reason I hadn't already was for the sake of Dan's kids, so they have one chance to get the hell out. The moment my parents heard that, I think it finally clicked that they could not force me to do it for Dan. My mother surrendered and said she'd put an end to this. Then she went over to sister-in-law and spoke with her quietly for a minute while my father spoke to Dan. Sister-in-law instantly started loudly crying, then ripping up the fake rental papers into tiny bits and tossing them like confetti, only to have an officer tell them to pick up the bits of paper or he'd cite them for littering. Both of the cops at this point had the "I don't get paid enough for this" looks on their faces. Dan had to start telling his kids to load their stuff back into the moving truck. The kids were all crying, and the eldest was sobbing that he won't get his own room now. Sister-in-law and Dan gathered their kids up to try and make one last pathetic attempt to guilt me with a sad family routine. You know, where they all gather together in a sort of group hug while all facing one direction. I swear, I think they'd practiced it beforehand. All of the kids had the same pleading look with quivering mouths. Sister-in-law kept rubbing her pregnant belly and tilting her head to look like a sad puppy, and my brother just made the saddest face he possibly could and said, "Please don't do this. We need to be able to live here." But I didn't falter and told them to keep packing. All the kids and sister-in-law turned crying up to 11, and Dan yelled at me, "Are you satisfied with yourself? You've denied us a home because you're too selfish to share and help out family." I ended up laughing like a maniac and retorting that what he was trying to do was taking, not sharing. And no amount of crying will make me let his family move in, because he's no brother of mine anymore. He's just an entitled prick who thinks he can take whatever he wants from me like when we were kids. Dan started F-bombing me until the cops told him to cool it or he'd be in cuffs regardless if I wanted to press charges. He sucked in his lips and looked a mix of afraid and supremely pissed off. I asked the cops if they could stick around until my parents, brother, and sister-in-law had all left, and they said they had no intention of going anywhere until this had been resolved. In fact, in the next few minutes, 2 cops became 4, as more drove in for whatever reason. That gave my parents some extra incentive to get moving. I made Dan give me the keys to the new lock he'd put on my front door, though I got another lock the next day anyway because I didn't know if he had copies of the keys or not. He was really reluctant to hand them over. Then, instead of handing them to me, he actually threw them down the street and into his storm drain while saying to go get them myself. But one of the cops scolded him for that and made him go get them. He had to pull the grate off just to get at them, and he got pretty dirty in the process. When he got the keys back, he just grumbled and slammed them down into my hand. I then told them all to leave and never come back. My mother said I'd be disowned for this, as if that were some kind of threat to me. And I voiced that to them. Then in an overly sarcastically, I said something along the lines of, "Oh no, that means I won't get to come to any holidays with you guys, where I always get treated like shit by you all anyway. Because Dan has always been your obvious favorite. You all treated me so badly when I was growing up, that if Dan ever needs an organ donor, I wouldn't give him anything. So do like you always told me to do when I was mistreated by all of you, and suck it up." My parents were floored after I said all of that, and the quartet of cops were looking pretty judgmental at them as well. I tell you, if you want to put nasty parents like mine on the spot, confront them in front of cops, because they'll likely not try anything really stupid then. My mother just started crying and walking away. My father just stood there looking like he wanted to hit me, and Dan just held his kids in defeat. Oh, and sister-in-law was off having a tantrum in my front lawn. Soon enough, they all formed a line handing out boxes and got their stuff out of my house. Nothing had been unpacked yet, so it all was taken out pretty quickly. But while doing it, my mother kept saying it wasn't too late, and I could still do it for Dan several times. Each time, trying to bargain more and more to try to make me change my mind. She said that Dan could pay me rent if I let them stay, and when that didn't work, she said I could move back in with them to let Dan rent my house, so I wouldn't have to share the building. I told her to shut up and keep packing boxes, because I don't want Dan or his family around. I don't want his money, and I certainly don't want to live with him, nor my parents ever again after the way they treated me when I was a kid. Making a deal with my parents would be like making a deal with the devil to me. Sister-in-law ended up having another tantrum after hearing that and threw a box down, then sat on the ground to have a pity party because she didn't want to go back to sharing a house with my parents. And she just sat looking angry/sad there until everyone else was finished. She didn't even want to get up when it was time to leave. They finally got everything out of the house and into the truck. So before they left, I laid into my parents one last time about all of the crap they put me through growing up. And with 4 cops being right there, they couldn't do much other than stand there and take it for once. I called them out on so many things that happened, and even pointed out how they couldn't just do something nice for me, like letting me stay over with my camper when I was homeless and trying to get back on my feet. How they let Dan and sister-in-law ridicule me and call me a bum. Well, who's the bum now? They wanted to kick me out of my own house so Dan could stay in it free of charge. Yet when I needed a place to go, they wanted to gouge me for more than I could afford just to park my camper when they knew I was out of job. There were more extremely judgmental stares from the cops when I said all of that. So I put my parents on the spot one more time and asked them what I ever did other than being born to deserve being treated so badly. Because when I finally have a bit of success in life, they want to snatch it away from me for their favorite child, since they'd rather I give everything to Dan and leave nothing for me. I bought my house using the money that I earned. I owed them nothing, and I won't be asking anything from them ever again, because clearly I will never be anything more than a doormat or a cash cow in their eyes. I got no answers from them. They just stood there looking like fish out of water. So I continued ranting and asked them what in God's name made them think they were such good parents after all of that. My father was beet red, but more from embarrassment than anger this time, that my mother was crying that she was a horrible person. I bluntly agreed that she is a horrible person. They all are, and I bet they'll go to hell for it too. They were crappy people and they all knew it, but if I'd call them out on all of this stuff in private instead of in public, they just get mad at me and still act like I'm in the wrong. They just kept up the denial for so long that it became a part of who they are. My mother buried her face in my father's jacket to cry, and my father looked more defeated than I've ever seen him. Dan and his family avoided me entirely as they finished putting everything back in the moving truck. I made sure nothing of mine was stolen. Not that I'd had a chance to get much furniture yet. I was lucky to even have a couch at that time. They all got back in their vehicles, and sister-in-law just stood staring at me with malice until my brother finally got her to drive the minivan home. As soon as they were all gone, I got back online again and spilled the beans on what happened. My parents were too embarrassed to even try and defend their actions this time. And while the family was somewhat split before this incident, it was now a landslide in my favor. Nearly all of the family has sided with me after this incident, and those who haven't simply aren't siding with anybody. No matter how much my parents previously tried the "we did it for Dan" line, no one listened anymore. So any remaining familial support they had is now gone. Many in the family who I expected wouldn't side with me did. That includes the former flying monkeys. So I guess they've finally had enough. Around that time, I offered to host half the family at next Christmas Eve in my new house. My parents were not invited. I wasn't blocked on my brother and sister-in-law's profiles, surprisingly. And I saw sister-in-law had her 4th baby in early November. They are still living with my parents. I'm pretty sure they knew I was watching, because sister-in-law kept making passive-aggressive posts every couple of weeks or so about not having enough space while living with my parents, probably to see if she can still guilt me. And I'm sure it's driving my mother and father up the wall, because they aren't getting any peace and quiet in their old age with 3 rowdy, obnoxious kids, a mentally unstable sister-in-law, my golden child brother, and a newborn baby in the house all at once. Perhaps they could move into a camper in their own backyard and let Dan take over their house completely. They might get some peace then. Yeah, they could do that for Dan. Part 3. I was trying to keep things to 2 posts, but I realized while compiling everything that part 2 was just too damn long. So, I've divided it into a part 3. For those who commented en masse to get cameras, I will, when I can afford it. I'm still in financial recovery from buying a house last year. And as far as I know, good cameras need a decent computer to record to, and I don't have anything more than a 3-year-old laptop that runs Windows 10. Yes, I am aware of doorbell cams. That will be the first kind I get. For those who kept asking that I should have just gotten my brother and sister-in-law arrested, the only reason I didn't was because they are parents. Their kids need them. And if Dan was arrested, he'd likely lose his job. And without that, his family has no money. And sister-in-law has an only months-old baby right now. Neither of them needs to end up in jail. But you don't need jail for revenge. Police can help, yes. But I got payback without filing a police report. Would I be this merciful again? More than likely not, and they know it. I decided to wait on making an account and posting until after the new year, just in case more stuff happened. And it did. As previous readers know, my sister-in-law was making passive-aggressive posts on social media that were obviously directed at me, especially after her sister-in-law had her 4th baby in November. She was posting the same repetitive nonsense over and over again. She just found semi-clever ways of rewarding it. But she pretty much kept regurgitating that she was tired of living with my parents, that there isn't enough space, she needs her own house, blah blah blah. I know I sound dismissive, but live through what I have with these people and you'd be ready to sarcastically play tiny violins in front of them too. They're just that bad. And since I waited until January to make an account, more happened just like I thought. I stated before that I'd invited half the family for a Christmas Eve party at my house. And everyone I invited all came, even though it was a fairly long drive of around 3 to 4 hours for them. But they wanted to come and show me their support. I was praised by them a lot for how hard I'd worked to get a house on my own, and that they were sorry for everything I'd went through. I was asked why I didn't just take my camper and drive 3 hours back to them, instead of living pretty much homeless for so long. And I had to sheepishly admit that I was very attached to living around here, and I had my best employment opportunities in this area. My hometown doesn't have a lot of great job opportunities in my field, if any at all. And I wanted to make my own way as much as I could, an answer they overall accepted. We moved on to having a rather nice party, the best I'd been in years. Some relatives even brought CDs of great Christmas albums. And I have to say, the one my uncle brought of Ray Charles was my favorite. He sings Christmas songs like no one else I've heard. It was a grand and happy time. I felt like for once I could just forget my past issues and enjoy the moment. But I wouldn't be writing this if it had stayed that way. About 2 hours into the party, you know who showed up. My parents, brother and sister-in-law popped in trying to look all smiles. They didn't even knock, just walked right in my front door like they were meant to be there. I shut off the music and told them to leave immediately. They begged to stay and said they brought gifts. One of my uncles stood up and yelled at them before I got another chance to speak, and he said they don't deserve to be in my home or my life after the nonsense they tried to pull months earlier. And he was backed up by several other relatives. Mind you, this guy is my mother's brother, and he used to love her to pieces until he found out about the crap that went on between me and my parents. My grandparents, mother's parents, as old as they are, hurriedly got in between us and said to my parents that if they want to make amends with me, it's far too soon, and that they've never been more disappointed in them than they were this past year. They'd hidden their favoritism for my brother from prying eyes for a long time, but no one was fooled anymore, and they needed to make a serious effort to try and actually treat me like a son if they ever wanted to be in my life again. Then they turned to Dan and sister-in-law and said they've seen the repetitive nonsense sister-in-law keeps posting about. They're tired of it, and to just let it go already. My house will not become their new home. Sister-in-law went back to her old standard of crying and had a pity party about how she should be the one living here, and not me. She plopped down in a chair to have a tantrum and said it wasn't fair I got this house to myself when I have no family of my own, and she has 4 kids that need more space, and she just wanted a better place to live in and feel like a real mom. It was petty of me, but I loudly pointed out that she sucks as a mother because she lets my mother do most of the parenting, while she sits on her butt all day drinking, playing on her phone, or going out and spending all of Dan's money. And she has the nerve to complain about it? I even joke that I'm surprised her baby doesn't get drunk from her breast milk, since she drinks so much booze, which I admit went a bit too far so I got some stares. She demanded to know if I was calling her a bad mom, and I said the evidence speaks for itself. And if she wanted to be able to afford to move out of my parents' house someday, then she needs to put her college degree to some use, get a job, and learn to save money. My mother already does most of the childcare for my brother's kids anyway, so she'd have plenty of time after her baby gets a little older. My brother's eldest kid is 7 years old, ran up to start kicking and screaming at me for yelling at his mom, and kept at me about how his mom said that I was the bad guy, who made her cry and didn't let them live here. That's when my brother grabbed his son to pull him away, but all the other relatives jumped back in, and this sort of turned into a family intervention against my sister-in-law and brother. She was crying, her new baby was crying, her kids were crying. Hell, even Dan was very nearly in tears from the verbal lashing he was being assaulted with. He ended up just sitting on the ottoman I keep shoes in by the front door and looking like a complete wreck. He couldn't look anyone in the eye. He couldn't even say 2 words to me, not with the whole house filled with angry people, ready to judge him if he tried to let out his inner golden child again. If they weren't there to get in his way, I bet this would have ended up a repeat of when he tried to order me around to try and take my house months earlier. By this point, though, had been so thoroughly humiliated that his and my parents' reputation in the family was completely destroyed because the masks were all off now. Soon after, my parents, brother, and sister-in-law all left in defeat. The party resumed, and we all avoided speaking of what just happened for the rest of the evening. Since most of the adults had been drinking, everyone stayed the night in my house. I even let some of them sleep in a camper so there'd be enough space. I admit it also makes a good guest house. My relatives all wanted a tour of it earlier as well, and they said they couldn't believe I'd been living in it for around 2 years. I got a lot of questions about it, like what summer and winter was like and so on. I was up earlier than everyone else Christmas morning, and had a fresh pot of coffee and some ibuprofen for those spiked eggnog hangovers a few of them had. I was complimented in being a way nicer host than my parents ever were, and we all agreed to do this again next Christmas. After Christmas, sister-in-law did finally stop making posts that were obvious digs at me, and deleted all of the old ones as well. But shortly after the new year, she more recently made a new post complaining about how she'd tried to convince my parents to get a camper like I did, so it could be set up in the backyard, so Dan and his family could use the whole house as their family home. Well, a taste of one's own medicine is never fun, because my parents turned that idea down. Vehemently, I hear. No one's gonna push them out of their own home, let alone their master bedroom. The post was only up for a couple of days before sister-in-law removed it, and she has hardly posted anything since then. She loves to complain, but if a tree falls and no one is around to hear it, can it still complain? Sister-in-law, I guess, has realized there's no point in doing it when no one hears her anymore, and Dan can't afford to move his family out on his salary alone anytime soon. If they end up expecting another child in the next few years, I won't be surprised. Things mellowed down for me since then, and I've even invited friends over for a poker night. I suck at poker because I can never remember a damn thing about it. But so what? We get to drink beer and eat junk food while being merry idiots. We all loaded up on Whoopers from Burger King, and just had at it the best way 4 grown men can, when they just want to have a good and adulterated time and get pissed drunk. I think maybe around summer I'll look into possibly dating someone. I'm not exactly getting younger here. Fingers crossed that goes well. My camper just sits idle in my yard now, and I admit, there were some days I went out there just to spend time in it. I did live in it for 2 years. It's like my second home. And maybe one day I'll actually get to use it for camping, like it was meant to be. I've never been camping. My parents considered it a waste of time, so it would be a completely new experience for me. This pretty much marks the end of what happened. My parents, brother, and sister-in-law have all been staying very clear of me. In fact, they seem to have gone back to acting like I don't exist, like they did before I bought a house. Not like that bothers me at all. It's better that way. But they inevitably come back in some way. I know they will. I just wonder what kind of stupid thing they'll do next. If anything notable like all this ever happens again, I'll make another post if this account is still active. God willing, this is the last you'll have to suffer with them. Agree. What I don't understand is that little brother lives in your parents' house. He's probably not paying rent, utilities, or food. So where is his money going? It is my understanding that he's been living there rent-free for at least 7 years. More than enough to save up for a nice down payment on his own house. If you ever have the unfortunate chance to meet him again, remind him of that. Tell him that if you can do it, so can he. Tell him it's time to grow the hell up and quit expecting others to support his sorry self. Good luck. The wife drinks and shops most of it away. I'm proud of you. I'm proud of your extended family. You absolutely can't pick who you were born to, but you can pick who's important and who you spend your time with. Between your extended family, your friends, and a possible future romantic relationship, I hope the rest of your days are full of joy and peace. Coming from an abusive family, I know how difficult it is to set boundaries and stand by them. You've done a phenomenal job, and you've made a phenomenal life for yourself, Opie. Mrs. Evil Spawn keeps getting pregnant, not because she loves or wants children, but in order to use the kids as spawns, doesn't she? Your earlier posts had my blood boiling so hot. That didn't occur to me before reading this one. Now, Mr. and Mrs. Evil Spawn are probably going to attempt to drive your so-called parents out of their own house, but as you noted, your parents are not likely to let that happen. Grab a bowl of popcorn, Opie. As long as they're all leaving you alone, this bit of karma should be fun for you to watch. As you said so perfectly, a taste of one's own medicine is never fun. How I wish I could have seen the look on your mother's face when she realized that her own brother and her own parents were judging her guilty as charged. All four of them, your parents, brother, and sister-in-law, are now reaping what they sowed. Let them, and enjoy watching the disaster that's about to play out. Yes, she does weaponize her kids to get her way, but you can't milk that forever. I'd invest in those cameras sooner rather than later, or the comment from the last post will probably end up true. Part 4? So they burned my house down. I'm proud of you for standing up for yourself and getting the evidence to back it up. Do not assume this is over or you've won. This won't stop. Even if they go a year or two before doing something, this will eat at them because they are trashy, entitled people. Keep it up. You got this and you are going to do well. Again, I'm proud of you.